Hello, 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 hello.
What I've been told and what feels best, but in you I see
Everybody?
best.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everybody. I just want to do a bit of housekeeping before we get started. There's not meant to be a fire alarm, so if there is a fire, I don't know why I'm laughing, it's not funny. If there is a fire, we need to evacuate. Go live, isn't it? Yeah, we are going to start shortly. I'm going to introduce everything, and I'm going to swap mics. And I'll invite Ashok to come and do this year's lecture. So, thank you for your patience, and I hope you enjoy this afternoon. Are we ready to go live? Are we going? Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes, brilliant. Hello and welcome everybody in the room and online to the Liverpool Museum and DaDa's annual Edward Rushton Social Justice Lecture on UN International Day for for Disabled Persons. Today, the world population. Can you hear me? No, sorry, I keep thinking it's dropping out there. Today, the world population is over 7 people, and more than 1 billion people, or approximately 15% of the world's population, live with some form of disability. 80% of them live in developing countries, and wars and conflicts create more and more disabled people every day. My name is Ngozi. I'm co-executive producer of DaDa, a disabled-led organisation based here in Liverpool. I'm a black woman in a wheelchair wearing brown boots, black trousers, black jumper, a red coat, a black and gold scarf, and a black beanie. I think I like black. I'm also an artist and a filmmaker. DaDa has been holding the Edward Rushton Social Justice Lecture since 2014 in honour of a local man who impacted the city and the world with his views and work. Rushton was born in Liverpool in 1756. He was a human rights activist, an anti-slavery campaigner, a political campaigner, an anti-war activist, a poet who became blind as a sailor after contracting a polio on a ship carrying enslaved people. A person who I believe embodies the Rushton through his work and his artwork and his views is, for 25 years, is Ashok Mistry, who is a proudly Leicester-based neurodivergent, multidisciplinary artist, writer, researcher, activist and creator in the UK and internationally. Subverting technologies, ideologies, he challenges conventional views of making and viewing art. Who in today's lecture, Reclaiming Nonchalance, will be challenging art world's view of the worth of deaf and disabled neurodivergent artists working in their essential state. How can we address the structures in our society for viewing and valuing everyone? Please give a warm Liverpool welcome for Ashok Mistry.
Gosh, months and months of work, and here we are. Just want to say thank you to a few people. Wanted to thank DaDa Fest for this opportunity. Wanted to thank my wife, especially, and my children and my mum, my family in general, for all their support, and for the arts organisations that I've been working with, such as Disability Arts Online and Dash in particular, who've been supporting me and the writing that I've been doing over the past few years. So let's get into it. In this lecture, I will shorten deaf, disabled and neurodivergent to disabled. When I talk about disabled people, I refer to people with neither societal privilege nor equity. This distinction is important as it allows us to better understand the socio-economic impact of disability. Furthermore, although I speak mainly about disabled artists, the principles I will explore relate to how disabled people in general are valued within society. Most of the examples I provide refer to the visual arts sector, though they are also relevant to performance. Okay. I'm going to talk about nonchalance as a disabled artist, which may seem conceptual, but in my opinion, creative nonchalance is essential for every deaf, disabled and neurodivergent artist because it enables the exploration of creative ideas without trawling trauma or encouraging imposter syndrome. The lecture will chart a course that embarks from a place where artists conform to expectations and via a biting critique of establishment values arrives at a milieu that sees disabled artists following their own ambition. In order to explain nonchalance, the lecture is framed in terms of human value, which sits at the core of the change needed for equity to flourish in both our art sector and our wider society. In order to appreciate human value, I will illustrate dehumanization by revealing the 4 arrows that I have found to pierce the body of humanity and make some of us disposable in the eyes of other people. Finally, I will meander through a promenade of observations and value systems to unpick the prerequisites of human value, how that connects to the art that we value in a host of situations, and how reorienting our value system can make our art world more equitable. So please sit back and listen. I don't expect you to agree with everything, but just have the openness to listen. Whilst writing this lecture, a performance piece written and performed by the amazing Miss Jackie came vividly to mind. Titled Fire, the piece includes the lines, "I never loved the smell of gasoline, so the idea of throwing it all over me, setting self alight just to get your attention isn't appealing anymore." That was Miss Jackie in 2022. For me, these lines and the broader performance spoke eloquently about intersectionality and the challenges for global majority disabled artists to get noticed. They speak of the compromises and sacrifice of our natural nonchalance in order to fit the demographic profile of an artist. The questions generated from Miss Jackie's performance are: what does it mean to be a disabled artist, or from a global majority background for that matter? Are we as disabled artists meant to live up to the tropes of being disabled? Should we allow art writers to write about our disably work using ableist language, or are we to renounce disability and allow writers to never speak of it, enabling us to culturally assimilate to normativity? These are questions that I have also had to consider and actually point to a necessary and ruthless interrogation of the value systems of the art world. The first thing that disabled artists are confronted with when they emerge into the sector is an ableist, London-centric attitude across Britain and the wider world. Even with access support present, deep-seated ableism compels disabled artists to appraise their accomplishments against non-disabled, metropolitan, and ultimately normative sector-wide conventions. Few understand the time and resources disabled artists need to put together their own projects or engage with non-disabled artist-led initiatives. The arts contains immense wealth inequalities. At one end, the commercial sector is flush with money, while the DIY artist-led end that survives on public funding can never seem to afford access provision. I recently engaged with Jerwood Arts in relation to their Survey 2 touring exhibition, billed as a snapshot of interesting practice in the UK. I pointed out that of the 10 artists exhibiting, 6 were based in London, 1 was based in Cardiff, 1 based in Manchester, 1 based in Glasgow, and 1 was based in Berlin. And none of them identified as disabled or neurodivergent. This was by no means representative of the UK. However, their retort was that one should not look at where the artists are now, but where they have where they are from, and none of them were, or very few of them, were born in London. They also said that although some artists are in fact disabled or neurodivergent, they may not want to outwardly identify as such. These mother fathers, because let's face it, they did have a paternalistic attitude towards artists. They used a lazy, normative approach to selecting artists that highlighted a paradox of London-centeredness. They wanted people familiar with them, and that excluded disabled artists from London. It is as if being outside London had the same negative characteristics as being disabled and in London. Their reasoning struck me as specious and ableist, as it suggested a kind of survival of the fittest argument, and failed to understand the inaccessibility of London and other metro regions for many disabled and neurodivergent artists. Last November, Survey 3 was announced, so this is the next iteration of that exhibition, with 4 artists from London, 3 from Glasgow, 1 from Clitheroe, and 1 from Cardiff, and 1 from Derry. So where is Liverpool and Leicester? Our art world in Britain has 2 main components, the commercial and the publicly funded, both of which fulfill different roles. Commercial galleries are thought to operate in a market-driven model which aims to leverage celebrity with a defined practice to promote an exclusive product. On the other hand, publicly funded galleries are envisioned and assumed to allow for experimentation and creative growth, to make art for social good, and to allow space for risk that is unthinkable in the commercial world. Some of this is true, however, exploring the methods for systematizing the value of artists, and in particular artists who come from marginalized backgrounds, by the commercial and publicly funded hemispheres of the sector, one can see that they both utilize the same crude measures, commercial value and celebrity. Consulting people working at different levels in the sector over the years, I have researched the value system for selecting artists. Many don't respond, surprise, surprise, while others turn to the old measures of caliber, which sound like the approximation of artists' careers to firearms. Piao, piao, piao. Comparing reactions did suggest everyone was watching everyone else, as if determining the next zeitgeist was one big Mexican standoff. How do we value artists, and what are the mechanisms for that value? Researching who was showing across UK galleries, I cross-referenced this with the market, which showed the correlation in the majority of cases, between an artist being represented by a private gallery and their presence in the public sector galleries. It really felt as though public sector galleries were, or should I say some public sector galleries, were turning to the commercial sector to work out who to value. Surprise, surprise, the scarcity in the commercial sector of artists identifying as disabled is staggering. The hype of the PR machine behind represented artists is phenomenal. The world is murky and defined, especially at the bottom, more by grace and favor than originality, creative risk, or creative ambition. The presence of disabled artists in art education is evidenced by multiple research studies, amongst them the RCA, that's the Royal College of Art's 2015 study looking at the amount of their cohort who were dyslexic, which found that the size of the dyslexic and dyspraxic cohort to be 30% compared to around 10% in the general population. The problem is that available studies are selective in terms of the disability or neurodivergence they focus on. Nonetheless, a 30% dyslexic cohort is massive, and the only other place these levels of neurodivergence are seen are in prisons. In 2015, Arts Council England published their Making a Shift report that mapped the presence of disabled people in the creative workforce. It proved that disabled people only accounted for a tiny percentage of the creative workforce, with some art form areas, such as visual arts, in low single-figure percentages. We have a celebrity fetish we have a celebrity fetish that deifies artists, especially those who come from London. There are times when I wonder, what's the point of existing as, or even calling myself an artist, when I live so far, both physically and in terms of accessibility, from London? I bumped into the artist Haroon Mirza in 2013 at the Art Party conference. 3 years after he had won the Northern Art Prize, we discussed his meteoric rise to prominence following his award and how his life had changed. What struck me about our conversation was that regardless of any resistance he may have shown, he was compelled to gravitate to London, as this was the only place where the infrastructure existed to build his career. Whether he liked it or not, he had to engage with London and get used to its quirks. This is a shame. It's a shame on our publicly funded arts ecosystem. It's a shame on all funders, but particularly the trusts and charities that use their money to combat inequality. The question remains, why is the sector so London-centric? Could Mirza not have built his career beyond the gaze of the big smoke? Why is being present in London, especially in this digital age, so important? What does it mean for the public funding potentially invested in Mirza by arts funding bodies in Yorkshire? Was this the return on investment they expected? In order to understand human value, we must first engage with both the systems of value and structures that devalue people. Many art-focused systems of value waltz with structures that devalue people, as they are built on using hierarchies that use assumptions and judgments to justify the presence of or investment in some people over others. Think about it for a minute. In school, think about who can see themselves as artists. As we explore this thread of inquiry, we'll find ourselves at the deified feet of children who can draw realistically or mimic in some way the style or attributes of established artists. In the same way we deify artists, we also deify the root of becoming an artist. Analyzing why and how particular marginalized groups of artists have become dehumanized, I noticed a recurring pattern of events that have led to policies, behaviours and systems that deemed people as of less value. Dehumanisation relies on an arrangement of 4 elements, arrows if you please, arrows that pierce the body of humanity and in turn encourage one group of people to perceive another group of people as less than human. I have identified 4 arrows to be ignorance, acquiescence, propaganda and supremacy. What follows is a promenade of musings that explain these 4 arrows and how they construct division that enables a wasteland of marginalization. I'm going to start with a quote exemplifying supremacist belief. This is Winston Churchill talking about the Palestinians in 1937. I do not agree that the dog in a manger has the final right to that manger, even though he may have lain there for a long time. I do not admit that right. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. They're the words of Winston Churchill. The quote provides an insight into supremacist attitudes in the age of eugenics. Although we associate eugenics with Nazis, this ideology which inspired these heinous acts to be perpetrated and condoned began in Britain with the father of eugenics, Francis Galton. One of the worst cases of dehumanization during World War II, emanating from eugenic theory, encapsulates my 4-arrow theory. In this episode, 18 doctors, men and women, stood trial for the killing of disabled children in a Hamburg hospital in the early 1940s. The story was brought to light and examined by the historian Johann Schaput in his book, The Law of Blood, from 2018. The doctors were brought to trial at the behest of the British occupying forces, during which the doctors presented their supremacist argument, which was that they had not committed any crimes against humanity because such a crime can only be committed against people, whereas the living creatures that we were required to treat could not be qualified as human beings. Prevailing dissemination of eugenics ideology was used to propagandize the notion that disabled children killed by the Nazi doctors were subhuman and therefore disposable. There was acquiescence on the part of the judges and prosecutors to accept eugenic ideology and therefore not form a counter-argument that saw the disabled children as human beings. The children were written off as inhuman and disposable by the ignorant naivety of the medical and legal system that had never understood them. Eugenicist ideas persist and remain within the systems and values that organize our society and sector. These same 4 arrows have been battled in the art world by organizations such as Disability Arts Online, DaDa Fest, Dash Arts, Outside In, Project Artworks, and many other arts organizations. In particular, disability arts organizations have worked to confront supremacist beliefs propagandized over decades, allowed to take root through acquiescence of art leaders and perpetuated through ignorance of audiences. By constantly asking and challenging norms. To quote Kate Adams from Project Artworks, "Who is not in the room?" Whenever we see disabled people, young or old, as an insignificant niche audience, or art created by or for disabled people as low priority amongst stratified marketing plans, we run the risk of doing as doctors and judges have done by narrowing the definition of humanity. In our sector, initiatives for marginalised groups rarely have any sense of ambition or scale and often only benefit a very small number of creatives. In particular, the artist-led sector provides the most cause for concern, as many decades old venues still have no physical or cognitive access. In many cases, artist groups ape the worst of the prejudices, expectations and values of their funded peer organisations. There is a lazy assumption amongst many, though not all, artist-led groups that disabled artists aren't interested, when in reality their non-attendance is predicated on the fact that they can't get through the door up the stairs of many small or DIY art venues, so they stay away. Many organisations use the excuse that their landlords won't allow lifts to be put in, whereas Schedule 21 of the Equalities Act clearly states otherwise, and I quote, "Where a landlord has refused consent to an alteration or gives consent subject to a condition, the person requesting the consent or a disabled person who has an interest in the alteration being made can refer the refusal or the conditional consent to a county court or sheriff's court. Such ignorant avoidances of legislation perpetuate injustices." The COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns that ensued galvanized a lived understanding of the world of disabled artists, as senior art leaders experienced the need for working at an equitable human pace. The arts felt enlightened, permeable, and aspirationally equitable. We were all stuck at home, but at least we were finally being listened to. As Britain stumbled out of COVID restrictions, campaigners drew up a set of 7 principles to ensure the arts sector didn't return to its ableist ways. Endorsed by the Arts Council England and other major arts bodies, the hope was followed by the equivalent of a needle of a record suddenly and unexpectedly being dragged sideways. Yes, Zoom meetings and the dreaded Teams meetings were possible, but sector presence of disabled artists based on the 7 principles are still an aspiration. Despite the hope, achieving it was still hard work, and it was easy to smile patronizingly with clueless immobility than do anything. The 7 principles are still around on the Arts Council's website. However, knowledge of them has fallen off the radar. What people fail to realise is that those 7 principles are a necessity for some of us. Last month, Paul Hamlyn Foundation announced their awards for artists. All but one of the 5 visual artists are based in London, and of the composers, 3 are based in London, 1 in Leeds, and 1 duo based in Scotland. Especially when looking at the Visual Arts Award, one can see a sense of possible reluctance to engage with artists beyond London. However, when looking at the nominators, the majority are based right across Britain, which begs the question, what is happening? Is there some unspoken code amongst nominators that ensures the grain of preference follows to the capital? Also, do disabled artists really need to drag themselves to London to be recognised? This echoes the Contemporary Art Society, whose funding for acquisitions for artworks to museums, galleries and collections is heavily biased in favour of London-based artists. Where is the equity for disabled artists who cannot get to London-centric exposure. Activism is difficult and messy and consuming and draining and an uphill struggle, and sometimes takes us down dark rabbit holes. But what we need to remember is that activism is always situated in a place of hope. Activism is the ability to see a different and better way of being and grasping for that at all costs. Activism is about crossing the line between orthodoxy and heterodoxy to explore what is differently possible. One question I've asked myself is, when is an activist not an activist? It sounds like the start of a very unfunny joke, and the answer is before they realize that they need to become an activist. More and more people are feeling the need to become activists, and some don't even realize they are activists. Disabled artists in particular see it as a necessity to engage and activists as activists with the world that refuses to understand them. One question I always ask myself is when, sorry, I've done that bit, haven't I? Okay. Whatever kind of activist I am, one lesson I have come to realize over the past 27 years is that I can't survive without being an activist. It's essential to my survival. But I found two types of activists: some who bang on the gates of the system to insist that they are let in, and others who break down the gates because they are a barrier. I have known some disabled artists to use activism, but have internalized the stigmas associated with disability so deeply that they yearn to be part of the exclusivity of the arts establishment without questioning what it means to fellow artists. There is no attempt to change the system, but just be subsumed within it. I need to be careful here, because I don't want to undermine the work of all of the fantastic allies that support disabled artists. However, there are two types of allies. There are those who understand and strive to make a difference for marginalized people because they see value in them. And in this respect, they understand that they strive for equity, even if it means that they need to work in an insurgent way that may damage their careers. There are a great deal of fantastic allies out there, but there are an equally small group of bad actors positioning themselves as mediators who sit between the art world they inhabit and the world of disabled people. These mediators will push normative values into disabled artists to make them more palatable rather than allowing them their nonchalance. Many of the allies I've encountered have manifested in the form of curators. The best of these have come from the engagement or education curators, such as Icon Galleries, Lindsay Stuvers, and a few of the worst and most dismissive examples have come from education curators and programmers. The profession of curators is curious beast because it has been defined, amongst other things, as a trendsetter, a designer, a conservator, a collector, a gatekeeper, a hunter, and many other things besides. Yet the word curator comes from the Latin word curare, who to take care of or be the guardian of. The questions that emanate from this etymological sojourn are as follows. Can we as curators care without being compassionate? Also, who or what is a curator caring for, and who or what do they disregard as not being worthy of being cared for? To understand my own nonchalance, I have had to dig through layers of experience covering the landscape of how I thought. This included reaching deep into the wells and caves of my own internalized ableist attitudes and to reconnect with my belligerent heart of resistance. You may have noticed that I now refer to myself as a Leicester-based artist, or sometimes even a proudly Leicester-based artist, but have in the past called myself a UK-based artist, a British artist, or even an East Midlands-based artist, anywhere but little old Leicester. The fact is that years ago I made a conscious decision not to move to London because I knew I found it difficult and had caring responsibilities. A curator once advised me not to mention my participatory work when approaching galleries, but I wanted to engage with people of all ages through creative participation and create exhibitions that were an active conversation with its audience and not a hegemony. Around a decade ago, I attended an artist surgery organised by a London-based art gallerist wannabe who looked through my multifarious collection of artworks and described it as schizophrenic, which, apart from being ableist, was lazy and inaccurate. All this because he had an expectation of a consistent, distinctive artistic style which he was keen, if present, to exploit. All we require is ambition to attain an otherwise unseen reality. But what is ambition and what is its antithesis in the context of making art? For that, I would like to take us back in time to the late 1970s and my lived experience of raw creative ambition. Digging deep into my past beyond sediments of acquired self-loathing, deeply hued layers of entwined cultures, occurrences beyond my own years, attitudes built on foundations of ignorance, I finally returned to why I became an artist. This archaeological process yielded an understanding of why I actually became an artist, and the series of unconnected events landed me identifying as an artist from the age of around 7 or 8. I was diagnosed with lazy eye, the treatment for which entailed covering up my good eye to encourage my so-called lazy eye to wake up and work better. Exploring the blurry realm of this brutalist form of therapy opened up an alternative perspective for understanding myself. The treatment was less than successful, though a curious side effect of the intervention resulted in me being absolved for the need to take part in any sports or PE. Yay! Instead, I was left alone in the classroom to do pretty much whatever I wanted to. My answer was to make. I would paint, draw, make installations, build sculptures, and more besides. This led to a teacher entering my painting of 3 cats in a garden into a Japanese art competition, which I received a prize for, out of the blue, on my 8th birthday, and the rest is history. What made me feel I was an artist was the investment I was afforded. Someone was able to look beyond my many marginalizations and saw some value in what I had created. The prize I received wasn't cheap, made-for-children material or toys, but artist-grade sketchbooks, oil pastels, oil paints, and so much more. Moreover, the work produced by us children wasn't seen as disposable. Instead, it was framed, cared for, and used to learn from by the Japanese foundation that had run the competition. My days of making with my eye patched in the classroom defined my nonchalance. They were steeped in my own innate sense of ambition, not in someone else's expectation. Fast forward to secondary school, college, and university, and my experience of art becomes increasingly prescribed and difficult for me to navigate, both as a disabled child and as a person of colour from a working class background. Art was something that people like me were not meant to make, and certainly not in the way that I made it. The way I understand nonchalance, especially in the context of creativity, is a relaxed attitude and contentment with one's original way of being and making art. Nonchalance is essentially about operating in an unmasked state, which is particularly important because it entails valuing oneself. Nonchalance also refers to a contentment that does not require any form of validation. The closest definition I have come across is the word musti, which in Sufi ideology translates to being overcome with, creatively speaking, a state of ecstasy. Another definition comes from the Gujarati cognate to musti, as I was brought up to understand, which means childish mischief. Therefore, musti, or as one of my mentors, an artist and neurodiversity advocate, Kai Sing Tan would put it, being ill-disciplined is a state of nonchalance that is essential to creativity. My unmasked nonchalance or way of approaching art is unique to me, but it has always been valueless in both the local, regional, national, and international art world whose blankets I've been coddled within. Everyone has their own state of nonchalance. Some define it as a state of non-action. Others define it as a perpetual state of action. Mine is defined by action and creation punctuated by rest. It allows me to operate without having to bottle up problems that explode into situations of conflict. I'm telling you this because it goes to the heart of difference and how we cope with the normative world and value difference. In the conformist and normative society that creatives inhabit, we are made to second guess and subdue that which is natural to us. From our formative years, our stims, tics, and the ways that we are, and any of our ways of being that are out of the ordinary are used as weapons against us. Anything deemed to be weird is to be feared, ridiculed, brutalized, exoticized, or exploited. I came to realize my natural state of being and of making art only recently through conversations with my great friend and collaborator, the artist, writer, and neurodiversity advocate, Sonia Bouet. Speaking to Sonia, I realized that for decades I was led away from my natural state of being to conform to making art from other people's personal and cultural perspectives. This is the crux of my lecture and the reason for my title. Reclaiming Nonchalance is all about one existing in the world in a way that is comfortable to oneself, not as they are expected or indoctrinated to. To get away from the tropes of art writing, I started looking at texts by medical professionals writing about art. I found a handful of studies connecting the unique coloration of Turner and Monet to the growth of cataracts, the yellowing of Van Gogh's vision due to medication, or Andy Warhol's fascination with uniformity with his autism. These studies thoughtfully and respectfully spoke of all of the evidence in plain sight, attributing said artists to seemingly stigmatized conditions. It is true that in some cases, without these differences, the artists may not have created the same breathtaking artworks they had. Yet, all of these artists are projected through a normative filter. Their characteristics become quirks of a genius rather than the narratives of a real person. To explore the disability-related backstory of art history, in 2021, working with Trish Wheatley from Disability Arts Online, we created the research group for the British Art Network called Disability in British Art, or DaDa for short. One aspect of the work we have undertaken through DaDa has been to explore how disability interacts with the creative process and therefore becomes one of the dynamics that define the artist's leitmotif. Hearing presentations from artists and PhD researchers, Rachel Gadsden and Richard Butchins, we can appreciate how the intricate dalliance between mind, body, and difference creates enigmatically unique manifestations of human experience. A large part of the work at DaDa has been peeling back the layers of stories that are told of artists, and in particular, how they are told. Working with Colin Hambrook from DAO, we have worked to understand better how disability is regarded in art, and by extension, how disabled artists have fared in collections and the market. Exploring art writing has given us an insight into how disability is regarded. It is barely considered part of the human condition. In the world of art, curatorial, critical, and journalistic writing, we can see that disability is viewed as a whole within a human experience rather than the whole part of human experience. I think this statement may point to the Derridaian flaw of spoken language. The words whole as in complete and whole as in a gap or a deficit sound the same when spoken, but have many differences and connections in the written form. And the idea of spoken homophones itself become a metaphor for how we regard difference in human beings, or as Jacques Derrida would have said, différence. So, to quote James Baldwin, we can disagree and still love each other unless our disagreements is rooted in your, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. I want to leave you with this quote because it best expresses the work that both artists and activists do, which is to understand how we understand and value each other. Baldwin's quote gets to the heart of what is meant to have a parity of esteem in any human conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok. That's very thought-provoking. We're going to take a break for about 10 minutes, so you can mull over that and come up with some great questions for Ashok and the panel. So tea and coffee will be served outside the room, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay. Yep. Can we do a quick group photograph? Is that okay? Okay.
Are we smiling or looking serious?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you had a good break. And this is the panel discussion in response to Ashok's presentation lecture. So let me just get my notes. So I'm joined by Ashok. We already know him. Lindsay Stories. Sorry, my iPad keeps moving. Just bear with me, everybody. You were so professional, Ashok, and I just messed it all up. So, Dr. Lindsay Stories joins us, leading Icon Education and Public Programme since 2017, spearheading initiatives like the art at MP, is it Grierson?
HMP Grendon.
And Icon Youth Programme. Kai Singh Tong, is an energetic artist, academic, agitator, and award-winning practitioner. And finally, Sonia Bury, a versatile artist, autism advocate, navigates neuro-inclusive arts with a focus on post-memory, displacement, and the domestic. She blends diverse mediums like paint, film, and performance. Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you. So, first of all, I just want to ask Ashok, my interpretation of nonchalance is to be led by your needs and wants. Is that kind of correct?
Partly, I think. I think it's rather than needs and wants, it's more about just being yourself, working with the ambition that comes from within you. I think that's kind of where it's situated.
Thank you for that clarification. But I also just want to bring you all in. What is your response to that lecture, that brilliant lecture? Who would like to go first? I'm going to have to pick on you if you don't.
I think it was a pretty brilliant lecture, so thank you so much, Ashok. It's so epic, it's sweeping, it's almost like a kind of a manifesto, and it's a very important manifesto, and I really thank you for that.
Brilliant. Yeah, I totally agree. Just one thing before I forget, I know you have to go early, so if they just disappear,
Yeah.
it's not magic.
Yeah, I might be trying to, I'm going to look like I'm trying to escape, but it's legitimate, so I apologize in advance.
And also, we've had a note from online, just when you ask, just speak slowly, because just for access needs for now. So I'm going to kick off some questions. Lindsay, can I start with you? You're an artist and also an insider, because you work in universities, correct? Yeah. Or you work.
I partner with universities.
You partner with universities. So how can you be yourself in institutional spaces, knowing that you're a bit of an activist?
Thank you. I'm really flattered by you calling me an activist. It's not how I necessarily identify myself. I identify with being a gallery educator, and I'm very much on the side of arts education. I'm very upset. I'm angry about the fact that arts education is not necessarily happening in schools. I'm upset about what's happening to our art schools and the slow and silent closure of these institutions. And I think that this is where Ashok and I have a very lively conversation around pedagogy and practice. And that's where we meet. We both ardently believe that art education is really crucial. Working at Icon Gallery, which is a contemporary art gallery in Birmingham. It's free entry for all of our exhibitions and education programs. I'm very keen to get education practice into the gallery spaces, to bring about some kind of complexity, some mess, some trouble, and I'm working very closely with artists like Ashok in order to do that. We have an exhibition together at the moment at Icon Gallery, which is part of Ashok's Don't Stare, Don't Freak series. He's been collaborating with our youth programme, and he said to me just the other day, he said, look, Lindsay, you know, you're an art gallery, you invite deep looking, you invite people to gaze, to stare at artworks. Well, within disability practice and discourse, that's a problem, staring, frankly. And as an artist activist, that is what I need to bring into your space, is to problematise the discourse around what it means to look.
I think you're a bit of an activist. That's
getting there.
Yeah. So from the creative side, Sonia, how do artists create and sustain their own self in the art world that devalues you and others them?
Well, I want to answer that and also respond to
please.
Ashok's
Anything I ask,
lecture.
please
Brilliant.
respond as well.
Thank you. Ashok, I found it an incredibly moving lecture, and I had the privilege of reading it a couple of times beforehand as well, and I was moved to tears by aspects of it. And it is, as Kai said, you know, the breadth of it, the amount of thinking, the complexity, the way that you bring all these different aspects of what it is to be a disabled artist in the landscape is extraordinary. So congratulations on that piece of work. What I also felt very much in the final section of the lecture, which I was identifying with very strongly, and sort of rethinking and being reacquainted with this idea of twinship around neurodivergence and difference in practice, because Ashok and I are actually developing a collaboration because we have had many conversations where we realize that our work overlaps and mirrors in so many different ways. So I just want to say that I think that what you're talking about...
Yeah, not just our work, there's so many aspects that overlap.
Of our lives, yeah, exactly. But what I think this indicates to me is it won't just be us, that we will have many twins, we will have many siblings who also experience these barriers, who also need, want and desire the liberation that comes from this idea of nonchalance. And I think for me personally, it's very linked to my own practice, a piece of work I've just completed, which is around unmasking your identity creatively as a neurodivergent person that could work across many intersections of difference and marginalisation in terms of identity. But I think that finding that core of yourself and working in a zone that is, I think, a sacred zone of unmasked authentic making, in which you've unpeeled the layers of conditioning and internalized ableism around what arts practice is, what an artist should be, what we look like, how we speak, what we do, what practices, all of that needs to be unpacked, I think, for each individual. And although we talk about nonchalance in this context, it's actually quite hard work to get there. So it's a process, it's a journey, I guess, for want of a non-cliched way of looking at it.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I always will have something to add. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you use the word twins to describe your kind of alliance and affinity. And I think people talk about kinship, don't we? And kind of, what's the other term? What's the other term? Sorry, it's a Sunday afternoon. Not your biological family. What's the term? You know, like LGBTQIA+ people use. Chosen families. Thank you. So that's also a similar concept. And in my own work, I use the word tentacularity. So you need to kind of use tentacles like an octopus to find your people, to find like-minded people, because the erect structures that we are boxed into, that we are pigeonholed into, it's very hard to find people that think like you, or people that share the same set of values, and you talk about values. So I think this idea of twins and kinship and so on, they're very, very powerful.
I just want to come back to you, Kai. So how would you suggest, like, the public sector, public sector art world restructures the valuation of artists' work, so it's not referencing the market-driven celebrity framework. You know, how can we do that? Because Ashok does mention that in his lecture.
That's a good question. I mean, celebrities are a social construct, right? I mean, who made them? They made, it's a kind of it's very interesting. And I think Ashok has told us in his own words what the kind of one response could be, which is the positionality of creative nonchalance, right? Setting your own standards and not masking and not following the kind of objectives that are set. And you keep using the word laziness. and it's a good word because that's exactly what the sector is. It would always describe non-white artists as emerging, even though they've been around for like ages and ages. That's because they haven't been going out to think about them, to search them, and to find out more about their backgrounds and so on, find out more about their practices and so on. So the sector is very much part of that kind of, that kind of whole celebrity culture. The sector is very guilty of that. When I say the sector, I don't just mean the arts and cultural sector, I mean the other systems around it, educational, etc. Because it's a kind of, they're all interlinked, and that's also, I understand that's a very neurodivergent way of thinking about things, like joining dots. But yeah, we need to really we need to do the work, and we need to do more homework and so on, so that we aren't just, I remember when I was working with Indonesian artists in the early 2000s, when Indonesia was just coming out of a political dictatorship, and the global market was hungry for Indonesian artists. They were trying to discover exciting Indonesian artists, thinking, oh wow, they must be traumatized about the dictatorship. What is their artwork about? And the young Indonesian artists I was working with, they were saying, no, I just want to paint circles. I don't want to talk about politics, and that is my choice. And that is a position of nonchalance, right? You're not playing the game, and you're saying, look, I'm setting my own agenda as an artist. If I want to paint circles, that is my choice, like Mark Rothko, for example.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So. Lindsay, do you have a take on the commerciality of it all?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like the thing that I take away from Ashok's lecture is this idea of a singular versus multiple art worlds, or the sole artist versus multiple collaborative artists and practice, and the fact that you give that example of the curator coming to your studio and feeling completely overwhelmed by the diversity of practice that's held within the studio, and their impulse to tidy up, to clean up what they're seeing, and to edit you, to give you a discipline, and to remove any kind of sign of experimentation or creativity. And I think that's this notion of a singular art world that is very commercially driven, I think is the problem that we're facing right now. And that as artists, practitioners, producers, curators, we need to maintain this very complicated, messy, contradictory multiplicity of art worlds, and how we continue to talk to each other.
Absolutely. I'm just going to take us out of this a minute. Can we just move that light down a bit? Sorry. It's in people's eyes. Thank you. Lizzie, so I just wanted to ask you, because you are in that gallery world, so why is it so problematic for artists to be their full self, required to shed their identities of, you did kind of touch on it, their disabilities, their activism, their pedagogy at the gallery door?
I think it's interesting for me because I'm somebody who came out of, I studied art history and was very interested in this idea of art for art's sake that came about during the post-war period, and the fact that a lot of our publicly funded art galleries emerged in that post-war period as well. And the idea that this white-walled gallery provided some kind of relief or sanctuary from the traumas of the war, so there's a poetics to that space, and things are implicit within that space. And I think that a lot of my curatorial colleagues are very highly protective of the poetics of that space. But the point is that I think there's a lot of pressure on artists at the moment to abandon their politics if they're going to enter into that, established space. And again, it comes down to, not who or what you represent and the community that you're a part of, but very much holding you up as a solo practitioner. What I would like to see, I don't think we need to abandon the poetical space in favour of a political space, but see how those two spaces just like twinning, just like multiplicity of art worlds, how they can coexist and how they might be able to have a conversation with one another.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, do we always have to have white walls? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and if mess is in the gallery, and we often see process in gallery spaces, you know, live performance in particular brings that element into gallery spaces, but it's often done in quite a highly controlled, almost neurotic way, and there has to be this sense of neutrality, you know, and I suppose what I'm interested in having a longer conversation with Ashok around the relationship between neutrality and nonchalance. You know, how they speak or how they maybe contradict one another.
So, Ashok and Sonia, your recent project, you did touch on it, unmasking neurodivergence. How does it relate to nonchalance? Can you both speak on that for me? Mm-hmm. Who wants to go first?
Yeah. Shall I give it a go and then you chip in? Sure. Yeah. So, Ngozi is referring to a project called neurophototherapy, which is playfully unmasking with photography and collage. And I find it so overlapping with this idea of nonchalance, because it is about and the whole concept of what you were saying about the archaeology of the self, and and returning to the moment where you knew you were an artist. This method which I've created is about returning to the moment before you began masking your identity, before you began this process of conditioning and normative, conforming around the social pressures around you. And it's about reverting back to childhood in a way, and trying to find those moments through photographs, through looking at childhood photographs. But interestingly also, I revisited in this work my first artwork that was ever framed, which was a piece of work that I did when I was 5, and that my parents kept and that I now still have. And it is one of the photographs in this book. And it's that thing of being valued that I found very compelling and very moving about what you were saying, and how if you've had those experiences and if you can hold on to them and revisit them, I think that's where nonchalance and congruence, a sort of a feeling of congruence, which is the word that I often use, that I think is very allied to this idea of nonchalance, is it's sort of this feeling of things joining up and feeling whole, as you were saying in your talk as well, rather than feeling fragmented and disorientated.
Gosh. No way to put you on the spot.
No. I'm trying to kind of think of where to start, to be honest. I think for me, working in an unmasked way or nonchalance or whatever you want to call it, is all about not apologizing. And remember when we worked on the Onyx Collective, and we came up with this concept of unapologetics. I think it was, who was it that came? Was it Miss Jackie? No. Yeah, anyway, yeah. It was we came up with this idea of unapologetics. And that really gets to the heart of this. If you have some kind of disability or neurodivergence, everyone around you from day one is apologizing for your existence. So you see parents with their children who might be neurodivergent or disabled or whatever, sorry when they're crying, sorry when they're existing as they are. So your whole life becomes an apology. And that follows into, it comes from the way society is set up. The apology is almost expected by some people. And as you kind of start to kind of unpick all of that, that's when you can start to understand that you don't really need to apologize for your own existence. You don't need to apologize for being who you are. Just be who you are and work the way. Like, for instance, when I see young people, young students who are changing their work to look more like what the sector wants or whatever, or disabled artists that are working through kind of like assisted studios whose work is being changed to kind of like fit the format of the sector. Essentially what's happening is those people that are working with them, the mediators or whatever, they're making them apologize for being themselves. And that's the essence of like understanding that you don't need to be an apology. You can exist as you are.
Yeah, there's so much that what you just said completely resonates. Even now I can find myself apologizing for being in the room, yeah. So let's look at the future. Kai, what is the way forward in leadership in a future-centered approach?
Well, I think one of the key things is to have leadership by neurodivergent disabled people, so that it isn't, well, often we have people who might not be disabled or neurodivergent who are making decisions about people who are disabled and neurodivergent. So leadership is the way forward. And often there are excuses. Oh, there's no pool of people. We don't have a pipeline, etc. Well, we have a pipeline. We're not looking hard enough. And there are also universities, there are also educational systems, there are also alternative educational systems that are creating new ways to think about the world, and which are interesting. And I'm heading programs on leadership, and we're looking at new ways to understand leadership. I mean, look anywhere around you, leadership isn't working the way we understand it in terms of how it is practiced. Just think of Partygate, Peppa Pigs, and so on, Putin. And just think about the way we define leadership. A lot of us think, oh, we don't want to have anything to do with the word because it's such a neoliberalist concept, and lots of us don't want to have anything to do with it. But there's so many examples of change-making, meaning-making, future-making. That's all leadership and co-creation, etc. But especially in the art world, and especially in people who are not part of the system, because the world is not made for you or with you. So you often have to hack the system. So a lot of us who are marginalized in different ways, especially those with multiple marginalized identities, you always have to find ways to hack the system without the right resources, and finding ways to, that's why people talk about crypt time, for example. It's a non-linear way of looking at time, for example. So that's all leadership. That's all creative approaches to the world. And that's kind of part of what I'm doing as well through my own role as I'm in higher education sector. So that's what I'm doing. But also beyond that, we need to be really thinking of having disabled people in organizations to also be having leadership roles. But also the other side to it is like what I was saying in terms of how leadership is now much more an expanded thing, and disabled people having more recognition in terms of what they've been doing.
I'd like to bring you all into this because I know, Lindsay, you've got some ideas, but Ashok, can I start with you? Do you want to add anything to what Kai's just said?
Yeah. When we talk about leadership, it has to be informed leadership in the sense that, or rather connected leadership. Like a leader can't sit at the top and then assume what's happening at the bottom level. They have to actually work at a grassroots level. I've been trying to get hold of the great and the good of the arts world. I've even been at kind of like events with leaders in the arts like Darren Henley and people like that. And what tends to happen is I'll go to shake his hand, and it's not him, it's the people around him. They'll divert me away. There was this great moment when I went to shake Darren Henley's hand, and he actually made eye contact and kind of reached out his hand. We shook hands, and then suddenly two people kind of came around and diverted me away in a different direction. And all I wanted to do was talk to him, but they felt threatened that, kind of like I was this shouty person that might say something, might say the wrong thing at a public event. Darren Henley, if you're out there, I'm here to talk to you. This is a challenge, really, to your leadership in the sense that are you the sort of leader that will come down to our level and listen to us? Or will you just stay there where you are? So the door is open. Come and talk.
Brilliant. Lindsay? Because we had a chat offline, didn't we? And you're doing interesting stuff as well.
Yeah, so at Icon, for the last 12 months, we've been trialling, testing an alternative model of leadership, whereby we're co-led by an acting CEO and 2 acting artistic directors, one for exhibitions and one for education. And the whole point of this is to try to establish a flatter, less hierarchical structure within the organisation. And that internal structure relates to our partnerships as well. So it was. I mean, since I've been at Icon, I've had a very lively, active conversation with the arts organisation Dash, and they've really informed and shaped the way that I work within the gallery. And actually, it was during that beautiful Renaissance moment that we experienced during COVID, during the pandemic, where everything went online and we were digitized, and then all of a sudden we were all on one level and we were all having conversations on that one platform. That's when that's when I first met Sonia and Ashok, facilitated by Dash. And so now we're working with Dash more. They have a base at Icon and they're able to have in-person meetings there as well. So it's this idea of having a more flatter internal and external partnership structure.
You don't have to comment, but do you have any?
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm probably going to bring a pretty different perspective on it, and I don't know how useful it is in terms of. I've realised recently that I'm a lot of a sort of power within sort of activist, and a lot of what I do is about sort of trying to build ways forward in terms of psychological kind of, reinforcement. But I think also in terms of leadership, I was saying earlier to Kai, it's something that I've wrestled with and left alone for a bit because I felt the kind of leadership that I was being encouraged to undertake was a form of masking and a kind of, we've got an autistic person in a kind of leadership sort of context. Isn't that great? And you get used as this token persona. And the only way that you're allowed in the room or allowed to stay in the room is if you're actually a carbon copy of other people, as that they want you because you're you, but they don't want you to be you. So that turns me off and doesn't interest me. But I always sort of, I think in my own mind, like to turn the tables on things, and I kind of go, well, make me interested in this. I'm not seeing anything out there that I'm finding interesting or compelling in any way. And so this is why I tend to create my own projects and tend to sort of try and self-lead, if you like. And for me, self-leadership and passing on the knowledge base that you accrue through that kind of work and empowering other artists who are coming up to self-lead. That's the kind of leadership that I guess I've been interested in and working with.
That's an interesting take. I like it, yeah. I've got one last question to ask you all, but I'm doing something a bit backwards. One thing I failed to ask you all, could you just self-describe yourself for the audience who are visually impaired? And then I'll ask the last question. So, can you do it, Ashok?
I don't think I did, yeah. So I'm a man with brown complexion, greying hair, salt and pepper. I have a white shirt with a grey jumper over the top and jeans.
Lindsay?
I'm a woman. I'm in my early 40s, and I am wearing all black, as you might expect somebody from a contemporary art gallery to be wearing.
Sonia?
So I always do this better when I'm on a screen because I can see myself. So I have to kind of like I have aphantasia, so I can't hold images in my head. So I am a white woman. I have a mullet hairstyle. I'm wearing a grey coat and a black top, and I've got octagonal brown rimmed glasses.
Very cool. And finally, Kai.
I am a woman with, like, it's very hard to describe. My fringe is very straight, and I am wearing black and black coats. I'm a visual artist. I have a doctorate, and I can't talk to. I'm wearing black clothes with like colourful, with a colourful dress over it.
Brilliant. Thank you. That was a different way of doing it. So my final question is to all of you. What is your response to the quote? Repeat the quote, or are you okay with that? I can repeat the quote as well. Can we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and the right to exist. James Baldwin.
Yeah.
Can I go with you
yes,
first, Carl?
You're looking at me and smiling.
Yes, I am.
No, it's a great quote that Ashok has chosen, of course. And it's a great quote for many reasons, but because it speaks, I think, to our sector in terms of how we shouldn't be thinking about oppression Olympics. It's not a competition in terms of who's the most oppressed. It's not a competition in terms of, oh, you know, we should prioritize this over that, because I think that can happen when we talk about disability. And I'm talking about the disability sector where I remember during COVID and then during the Black Lives Matter resurgence, and people were talking about how we need to talk about race, and the disability arts sector was thinking, oh, actually, no, our project is about ableism, anti-ableism, and that's our sole project. So when organizations and people use very specific prisms, that can often be imprisoning, and that I'm not suggesting that that is a deliberate thing, but often this can happen. And this has been discussed by different disability scholars and disability activists in terms of how this can be, this ignorance of intersectionality can be very, very, it's a reinforcement of white supremacy. So I think James Baldwin's quote is a very good one, because it's saying we need to pay attention to how we are different and how there's intersectionality to pay attention to. And I think it also brings us to the attention of the importance of allyship. It's also saying that we need to rally together, we need to look after one another. So it's not a competitive setup. It's a setup where we need to be in solidarity. And that's my reading of the quote.
I think I agree. Sonia?
Absolutely. I mean, the intersectionality is the bit that jumps out to me too. And the only thing I would really add to it is I think it's actually also a call for openness in terms of understanding. I think one of the things that's happened to us in recent years is a sort of a closing down of space, in a way, in which we seem no longer to tolerate, confusion or debate within these sort of areas of intersection. And, we have to be able to, in order to love one another, as the great James Baldwin would want us to do, in order to be able to do that, we have to hold space for one another. So for me, it's about that. It's about the intersectionality, but also the pacing of it. The sort of, this thing for me always comes down to, and we can't always achieve it, of course, because, each one of us are dealing with our own challenges, and it's difficult, and we can be hurt, and that's very difficult. But I think it's about holding space.
And sometimes we forget that as other people have challenges as well, don't we?
Yeah.
So, Kat, I think I'll let you go.
Thank you for dismissing me.
Yeah, no, I just thought it'd be easy to let you announce
you.
it, then you just sneak off.
Thank you
so
having me.
much. While I just get Ashok and Lindsay's response to that question, have a think of a question that you want to ask the panel as well. So, Lindsay, do you want me to repeat it, or do you?
No, it's fine. I mean, it's devastating, that quote, isn't it? It's heartbreaking. And we've all been on the receiving end of it. You know, oh, you're all right, you are. Despite the fact that you're of this community, you know, you represent these people, you're all right. You're the exception to the rule. And I think the thing that it really brought to mind for me was, at Icon Gallery, I'm known for working in prisons, working in the criminal justice system. And I work very closely with, as you mentioned in the introduction, a group of male prisoners at HMP Grendon. And we have this conversation all the time about, are they participants or are they themselves artists, curators, writers at the prison? And if I went up to one of them and said, do you know what, you're a prisoner, and I don't like what you represent, but you're all right, you are. You're, as an individual, I can accept you and I can embrace you and I can love you, but I can't accept what you represent. That would really not go down well within that context at all. And so, yeah, it's a very emotional quote, and I think that it's one that we need to rehearse, exercise all the time as people who are producing programme in our sector.
Ashok, do you want to have the final say?
How long have we got?
You haven't got long. No. It has to be a quick answer.
Okay. Quick answer. We need to consider our motives and consider why we kind of, dehumanize someone or kind of consider someone as lesser than ourselves. Is it that we truly believe that? What they're doing through this quote, what Baldwin's actually doing through this quote is actually getting into the mind of the colonizer and really kind of trying to understand what the dehumanization is actually predicated on. And it's predicated on a learned belief that someone is lesser than oneself. And where that actually comes from is actually threat and fear. That's where dehumanization usually comes from. It comes from a place where someone is threatened by someone else. So what they'll do is they'll actually put together a very simple set of propagandized views that try to kind of show the other person as lesser than them. And what Baldwin does is it breaks that apart. It's that idea of, okay, are we really just going to let each other exist, or are we actually going to work with each other in unison, hand in hand?
Brilliant, thank you. This is your opportunity to ask any questions. You don't have to, but it'd be nice. Yes, there is a mic. Yeah, Zach's there. No, but it'd be good for people online. Thank you. Can you just describe yourself? Is that all right?
I'm a white lady with stupid hair, a purple scarf, top, and black pants.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Ashok, thank you very much for your lecture. It was amazing. And you gave us an insight into your problems when you were a child. I remember children with eye patches when I was younger, and some of them got bullied. And did the medical treatment, the eye patch, did it work? Were you no?
Didn't. Not
So it must have been very, very difficult for you to see, really. You know, all the strain on the other eye.
Just kind of like orienting yourself. And the other thing was taking that patch off every day. It takes some of your eyebrow off with it as well. So I really hated wearing it. And then we tried different ways of actually doing this. And my dad would try and put the patch on my glasses rather than on my eye and all sorts of other things. But it was a therapy that was based not on a kind of like an informed or consensual kind of approach. It was more that we want this eye to work, and we're going to make it work by hook or by crook, and regardless of whatever pain it causes. And it was kind of like quite a thoughtless thing to do, to be honest. But the side effect was that it gave me the freedom to actually be who I wanted to be.
Yeah. Do you have anybody else got a question? Anybody online? Yep, we've got an online question. Oh, we've got one in the audience as well. Yeah, you go first. Yeah.
I'm a white Jewish older man, not a lot of hair, most of it grey, and wearing glasses. So, yeah, thanks all of you. It's been great on such a grey afternoon as this. And there was a couple of things, because interesting when you brought up Warhol, because we just talked about Warhol at college last week. I'm an art student, and I realised that the whole of art history has no mention of disability. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how many years will it be? It's certainly not going to be in my lifetime if it carries on like this, that we haven't had an impact. And I know that Claire Penketh from Hope University is working with Disability Arts Online to try and get into the A-level and the GCSE certificates start to change and bring up these artists. But certainly in the art schools, how can we get it into the system there? Because, I mean, all the tutors are really open-minded. Well, not all of them, but most of them are open-minded people. How can we start to get a change of perspective about artists and art history, just to understand? Because it's, as you said, and I can see it at Hereford Art School, 25% to 50% of the students are neurodivergent or disabled. So, yeah, it's the student body, but they're not recognising themselves in the art world. That was
Is that to everybody
question,
or to
sorry.
Is that to everybody or Ashok?
No, it was really to everyone.
Okay.
I'm going to let you go first.
I completely agree, Mike. I think that the art history of disabled art practice is absolutely fascinating and yet to be written. And I'd invite anybody in this audience to start thinking about how we go about writing that now. It's also interesting how you have the artist hero, the artist genius, and the word genius is itself a mask behind which there's all sorts of things going on. So maybe it's about us rethinking what genius actually is.
Sonia?
I think people have got to stop being frightened of this idea that you're pathologizing people or diagnosing people posthumously. I've had this said to me quite a lot, actually, because there's this thing, right, of, you know, you can see you can have an experience in a gallery, and I've mentioned this several times before on panels, but I think it's worth repeating, that I had a sort of almost a religious experience with the work of Agnes Martin, seeing her exhibition, a big retrospective of her work at Tate Modern, I think it was in 2015, and then going away and reading about her life and just thinking, well, of course, I've had an experience of recognizing a neurodivergent artist, and yet this is not something that's stated. And when you talk about it, people say, oh yes, but you can't do that. And I think we should have a podcast where we do this, where we actually talk about figures in art history, and, and talk about them, where it's not considered to be something that's awful. Because then you turn it around and you say, well, you're saying that my life is awful and I'm awful.
I think DaDa should lead on that podcast. Thank you for that idea. Ashok.
Oh gosh. With art education, I think there are a few stirrings. There is some change being made, especially in the university sector. I was just talking to a colleague just the other day, and they were saying 80%. He's running a foundation course at an art college, and 80% of his cohort are either disabled or neurodivergent, deaf, disabled, or neurodivergent.
Wow.
So, like, these people are entering the art sector because it's seen as a safe space for them, and then suddenly it's almost like you have to be brainwashed and then spat out as something that's kind of normal if you want to exist in the art world, and that's wrong. It's a cultural change that we need. We need a cultural change around understanding disability, and that goes to the heart of understanding what disability actually is. So is it a whole within a human experience, or is it the whole of human experience, as I kept saying? And that goes to the heart of it. Like, what is a normal person? What is a non-disabled person? How do you define that? And then from there, how do you actually define what a disability is? We could actually say that everyone is born disabled. When you think about it, everyone is. If you consider a baby, any baby, to and their capabilities compared to an adult, you know, they have carers, they have people who look after them day in, day out. And it's almost as if the idea of, what's it called, being disabled or being normal, rather, is being pumped into someone as someone is actually grown up. And what we don't realize is our capabilities in all sorts of areas, whether it's sight, hearing, movement, cognition, whatever it is, they change over time. And we can float in and out of spaces where we can, into times when we can call ourselves disabled or non-disabled. But it's fluid. It's not something that's static. You aren't always going to be non-disabled. Most people are going to, at some point in their life, experience some form of disability, and yet what we tend to do is to not talk about it, stigmatize it. So it's that, until that cultural change happens, we're not going to actually kind of deal with it in the education sector. The other thing is this idea of professionalism and the professional as being this whole perfect human being. And we need to kind of get away from this idea of the arts professional as a perfect human being.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any audience? No? I think we've got a couple from online. Thanks, Zach.
Hiya. So this is a question from Colin Hambrook, who's online, who I can't describe because I can't see him. He says, does Ashok have thoughts on the importance of decolonizing the body to challenge the subtle ways that eugenics theories have created a foundation for societal attitudes?
That's a big one, isn't it, to end on? Thanks, Colin.
The mind of the colonizer has always been exploitative. So the mind of the colonizer has always been interested in what they can extract from someone else. And a body that they can't extract from is useless to them. It has no value. And when we look at it, arts from that perspective, it's almost as if you are disabled, then you have no value that the commercial world or that the kind of the colonial world can extract. And I guess we need moves from the commercial world in that respect to really decolonize. Decolonizing isn't just about kind of like institutions, public institutions, and so on and so forth. It is as much about kind of private organizations and the thoughts of private individuals, such as collectors and so on, to be less extractive and to start to think about difference in a different way.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions online? I think we've got time for maybe one long one and one short one, if we can sneak it in. So have a think in the audience if you've got another question.
This is another online question then, from DaDa. How can we influence at the primary school level, sowing seeds for children to feel talented in their art rather than someone telling them that they're
I'm going
talented?
to go to Sonia first.
Can you repeat
Can
that?
you repeat it again, please?
How can we influence at primary school level, sowing seeds for children to feel talented in their art rather than someone telling them they're talented?
Yeah, I think this is really important, and it goes to the heart of my personal experience. I feel like I really speak on this. It would have been wonderful to feel somebody who had hidden disabilities, which included eyes that don't hold binocular focus. So my eyes have a slight variance on how they hold focus, which means that it explains why I was unable to translate information from a blackboard to a page, because my eyes would struggle to find the focus, and then when I moved my eyes down to the page, I would have again lost focus, tried to get focus again, and in that motion I would have lost that information. So it's a bit like having a bucket with a hole in and you're trying to get, you know, all the water across from one place to another. It doesn't translate, and there will be children who have all kinds of reasons why focusing on observational work and being good at drawing is a barrier to participation and to feeling that they have a right to have further education in the arts. So I felt barred from being an artist, even though I passionately wanted to be an artist from the age of 7, because I was no good. I was no good. I couldn't do it, and I couldn't explain to myself why I couldn't do it, and nobody could tell me why I couldn't do it. And I grew up with a great sense of shame around that. And I think it's that attitude of there is only one way to do this. We're going back to the singular approach. There is only one way to do this. There is only a particular type of work that can be judged as being good and valid. And that is soul destroying. And I can't tell you how many people I know personally, and I'm sure we all know people who feel that they're no good. When they could be very talented in lots of different ways, and that being creative is something that can be expressed in any infinite number of ways. And why do we close it down at that young age? Why do we do that to children?
Yeah,
Could I add to that as well? I've noticed that there's this idea that, again, this notion of genius or flair, that somebody can be presented with a blank piece of paper and produce something brilliant, and they're praised for doing that. But what about the art of copying itself? The art of copying other artists' work, or painting by numbers, or so. Just give people time to find, to explore and to find their own style and their own means of expression, and let them do that act of copying through school, and into adulthood as well. I really believe in copying as an art form. Although then copying could equally lend itself to masking, I guess, as well.
Thank you. Did you want to comment, Art?
Briefly,
Yep.
Very briefly. So we have all the answers to all of this. So there's traditions and conventions from all over the world, like Reggio Emilia and so on, where we encourage children to explore rather than learn by rote, to explore themselves and kind of learn through to kind of finding out information in their own way, in their own through their own capacity. And those are the main ways. Those are the kind of these things are established. They've been established for years and years, and yet they still seem kind of like a mystery to us. Art is an essential part of human being. It's one thing that separates us from other mammals, other animals. And it's a capacity that everyone has, and yet through this idea and this kind of concept of professionalization, we've all lost it. So as soon as we formed the professional artist, everyone else stopped being artists. And yet, if you look back through history, thousands and thousands of years, people have been artists all the way through. They've been making a mark, they've been kind of creating, they've been singing, they've been dancing, and they've drawing all of that time. But it's this idea of professionalization. There's a book by Michael Spitzer. It's more music-oriented. It's called The Musical Human, and it talks about the difference between how people in the developed world can consider the concept of music compared to in a so-called non-developed world. So in the non-developed world, if you ask a child, what's your favorite piece of music? They'll sing to you, they'll play the music to you. You know, it's part of them, whereas in parts of the developed world, if you ask a child the same question, they'll go and look for the track, you know, online or whatever, and they'll just play it to you in that way. So that separation has occurred through professionalization, and I think what we really need to do is start to reattach creativity to everyone's lives.
Thank you. Whenever I'm in the room with you, you always teach me, Ashok, always. I don't think we've got any time for any more questions, unless it's a really, really quick one. But I don't think we have. Do we have a really? Okay, brilliant. We've got one more quick one.
This is another one from online, and it's coming from Rona Topaz. And they're asking, what's the difference between nonchalance and complacency?
Okay, that is a really quick one. Or can it be a quick one? I don't know.
Okay. Complacency, to me, is... what's complacency? Is complacency part of the creative process? Is complacency... Complacency, for me, maybe speaks to stopping yourself from doing something, because what you're doing is you're trying to live up to someone else's expectation of what to do, whereas nonchalance is just kind of going with it and kind of creating in your own way. I guess that's the easiest distinction I can probably make.
Yeah, I think I agree. Do you want to add anything?
I was just thinking, I think nonchalance is kind of like, it comes from a feeling of relaxation and confidence in oneself, whereas maybe complacency comes from arrogance or a kind of like, you know, it feels to me like it's coming from a different emotional register
state,
in a way.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, I like the idea of nonchalance because it allows other people in, and it brings about this notion of community. You can actually sit back and relax and let somebody else take the centre stage for a while. You don't have to be the person who's at the centre of the room, at the centre of the conversation all the time. You can actually move back and have a rest and let one of your peers, one of your collaborators come forth. So I think, yeah, as a strategy, it's definitely something that I'll be taking forward within my own professional practice.
Brilliant. I'm going to draw this discussion to an end. I just want to thank Kai. They were there. Sonia, Lindsay, and Ashok.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. And I just need, just before we go, I also need to thank the Liverpool Museum for allowing us to host our annual lecture here again. Also like to thank our funders, Council England, I keep dipping in and out, Arts Council England and Liverpool Council, and of course you guys online and in the room for joining us for the Edward Rushton Lecture 2023. Thank you all.